I had exactly $14,280.63 in my business account when my sister-in-law's courier handed me the envelope. It was a Thursday afternoon in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was sitting in a recliner with my left foot elevated above a stack of folded blankets because I was 11 days out from ankle reconstruction surgery. I still had hospital tape marks on my skin. The pain medication made everything feel a little too bright, a little too slow. I remember dropping one of the ice packs when I reached for the envelope, and I remember being annoyed at myself for that more than I should have been. Across the front, in my brother's attorney's neat block print, were 4 words: notice of removal and demand. Inside was a letter claiming I had been removed, effective immediately, from the company I had co-founded with my brother, Evan Mercer, 15 years earlier. According to the letter, the board had voted unanimously. According to the letter, I had failed my fiduciary duties. According to the letter, my access to company accounts, records, and offices was revoked as of noon that day. There was also a second page, a scan board consent with what looked like my signature at the bottom. I stared at it long enough for the coffee on the side table to go cold. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Evan. "Don't make this uglier than it has to be. Just sign the separation and take the payout." The payout, according to his lawyer, was $48,000. He was trying to buy me out of a company that had just cleared a distribution contract worth a little over $3.2 million annually. I put the phone face down. The letter was bad. The forged signature was worse. But the thing I could not stop looking at was the return address on the courier slip. It was from our downtown office, not from the law firm, which meant someone had prepared all of this in-house before the attorneys ever touched it. That mattered, because if they'd rushed, they'd made mistakes. And if they'd made mistakes, they'd left me a way back in. By sunset, I would have a second folder in my lap and a deadline I could not afford to miss. Let me take you back. My name is Naomi Mercer. I was 41 years old, and I built supply chain compliance systems for regional food distributors. I was good at it because I noticed things other people ignored: timing gaps, signature mismatches, quiet inconsistencies inside polished reports. My flaw, if I am honest, was that I spent too many years believing family gratitude worked like a contract. You put enough in, surely some of it comes back. It doesn't. Our company, Mercer Trace Logistics, started in a rented office above an insurance agency in Matthews. My brother, Evan, handled sales. I built the operating system underneath everything else: routing controls, temperature compliance verification, vendor onboarding, traceability protocols, recall response architecture. When grocery chains wanted proof, I gave them proof. When restaurant groups wanted faster turnarounds without liability, I made that possible too. People who only saw Evan in a suit assumed he was the company. People who had ever watched an actual audit knew better. The first scar came early. Our father was a contractor who admired loud confidence and distrusted precision. Evan got praised for ideas before they existed. I got blamed for problems before they reached the room. When I was 16, I spent 2 weekends rebuilding our father's estimate sheets because he kept underpricing labor. He used the new version for 6 months and then told relatives at Thanksgiving, "Evan's got a real business mind." Evan smiled and accepted it like a tip. The second scar came 10 years later at our first serious investor lunch. I had prepared the compliance deck, the margin model, and the risk matrix. Evan arrived late, skimmed 2 slides, and then introduced me to a banker as the detail person who keeps us organized. I still remember the banker nodding at me politely and turning his body back toward him. Afterward, I said, "You know I built the numbers you just sold." Evan adjusted his cuff and said, very calm, "And I'm the one who knows how to get the room to believe them." That was how he did cruelty. Never loud, never obvious, just enough to reduce you by half and make it sound practical. For years, I tolerated it because the business needed both of us. He could open doors. I could keep them from collapsing. The company grew. Warehouses, cold chain accounts, regional medical food contracts. 3 states, then 5. We hired controllers, account managers, route analysts, compliance staff. Then came Lydia. Lydia Mercer was Evan's wife, And if you met her at a charity breakfast, you'd think she was all warmth and civic polish. She remembered names, sent condolence flowers, sat on 2 nonprofit boards. She also understood status better than anyone I have ever known. She didn't ask where power came from. She just moved toward it until people forgot it had belonged elsewhere. When our mother died, Lydia stepped quietly into the emotional center of the family. Dinners at her house, holiday planning, fundraiser tables, professional introductions framed as favors. It was subtle at first, then not subtle at all. She would say things like, "Naomi likes staying behind the scenes," while assigning herself public-facing roles I had built from scratch. I corrected her once. She smiled and touched my arm. "You're so good at the technical side." I meant it as a compliment. That sentence followed me for years. 3 months before the envelope arrived, we had the best quarter in company history. We were finalizing a major contract with a southeastern hospital network that required an independent chain of custody verification platform. That platform was mine, not metaphorically, legally. The architecture sat inside a separate LLC I had formed 7 years earlier after one outside counsel advised me, privately, "You are licensing your engine to your own family's car. Keep the title." So I did. The license agreement between my LLC and Mercer Trace had a canary clause buried in Section 11.4. If anyone attempted an unauthorized transfer, reassignment, reverse engineering, or removal of the licensor by forged internal action, the license converted immediately to limited emergency read-only status pending judicial review. Only 3 people knew that language existed in practical detail: me, our outside counsel, and our longtime controller, Marta Ruiz. Marta was 62, precise, and unimpressed by theatrics. She kept old-school paper backups in color-coded folders because, as she liked to say, servers can be edited. Ink makes people nervous. She called an hour after I got the envelope. Her voice was low. "Did you sign anything today?" "No, I didn't think so." That was all she said at first. Then, "Check your personal email." There was a secure link. Inside were scans of internal documents she had copied before IT locked her permissions. A board consent with my forged signature. An accelerated amendment adding Lydia as interim governance chair. A side letter instructing payroll to suspend my distributions. And one internal email chain that made my pulse go cold. Lydia had written, "We need this done before Naomi is mobile again. Once she's back in the office, she'll slow everything down with technical objections." Below that, Evan had replied, "Do it Thursday. Outside counsel can clean the paper later." I leaned back against the chair and closed my eyes. Mobile again. That was what I was to them. A scheduling issue. A woman in a brace who could be managed before she got back to her desk. Marta kept speaking. "There's more," she said. "The hospital network is expecting certification packets Monday morning. Those packets require your traceability certification key. Evan doesn't know the public system is only the shell." I looked at the scans again. When did this happen? Board signatures were assembled yesterday, but the metadata on the PDF export is from this morning, 8:12 a.m. They've built the final package today. Metadata, timestamp, device trail. I sat forward slowly. A forged signature could become a he-said-she-said fight if you let people muddy the room. But same-day metadata tied to an in-house document build during an unauthorized removal? That was different. Especially when paired with a courier log, a known vulnerability state, and a board process that had skipped required notice under our operating agreement. Marta said, "You have until tomorrow at noon. If they submit those packets without you, they'll misrepresent chain of custody controls to a regulated customer. If I miss this, I lose everything." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said yes. I called Elliot Sloan, the attorney who had drafted my LLC protections years earlier. He practiced in Charlotte, wore old ties with expensive shoes, and spoke like every sentence had already been edited twice in his head. He answered on the second ring. I said, "Evan forged a board consent while I'm on surgical leave." Elliot said, "Send me everything." And Naomi? "Do not threaten them. Do not warn them. Let them keep talking." By 7 that evening, I had a legal pad on my lap, a fresh ice pack on my ankle, and 3 columns written in black ink: forgery, governance defect, fraud exposure. Elliot came to my house at 8:30 with a slim briefcase and a yellow folder. He read every page once, then read Lydia's email twice. "This is better than I expected," he said. "Better? For you." He pulled out our operating agreement and opened it to an amendment I had not thought about in years. The company could remove a managing member only after 72 hours written notice and a live vote with all voting members either present or formally waived. I had received neither. Worse, because my LLC licensed the compliance engine, any fraudulent attempt to sever me triggered the canary clause and rendered them non-compliant for any contract requiring certified traceability. He looked up. "This isn't revenge. This is justice." I laughed once, without humor. "They'll call it revenge anyway. Let them. Judges are less interested in feelings than paper." We filed for emergency injunctive relief first thing Friday morning. Temporary restraining order. Preservation demand. Forensic imaging of the devices used to prepare the forged consent. Immediate notice to the hospital network that certification authority was under dispute and no packet submitted without licensor confirmation should be relied upon. At 10:14 a.m. While Elliot's paralegal was still uploading exhibits, Lydia called me. I let it ring twice before answering. Her tone was honey over glass. "Naomi, I heard you're upset." I said nothing. She continued, "This doesn't need to become embarrassing. Evan is trying to protect the company. You've been under a lot of strain." There it was. The old move. Recast competence as instability. Recast theft as stewardship. "I have the internal email chain," I said. Silence. Then, cooler, "You're making assumptions." "No. I'm reading." She exhaled slowly. "If you force litigation, the board will close ranks." I looked down at my ankle brace at the edge of the gauze where the skin still felt tender. "Then let them." She hung up first. At 11:32 a.m., the judge granted a same-day hearing for temporary relief because the disputed certification affected active commercial representations. Elliot turned to me outside the clerk's office and said, "Good. They'll have to talk before they're ready." That afternoon, something else arrived. A messenger brought a slim navy folder to my house with no note. Inside was a USB drive and one printed sentence. "Check the donor dinner footage. Use the audio from the rear camera." No name. That night, Elliot and I opened it in his office. It was security footage from a private donor dinner Lydia had hosted 3 weeks earlier for a children's food access nonprofit where she sat on the board. Elegant room. White flowers. Gold place cards. Men in blue suits pretending to speak softly. Rear camera audio was poor at first, then clean enough. Lydia's voice. "By July, Naomi will either sign or be sidelined." A man asked, "Can you do that without litigation?" Evan answered, lightly, "We don't need litigation. We just need paper." Elliot paused the video. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The second folder changed everything, because now it wasn't only metadata and forged signatures. It was premeditation. Public composure hiding private intent. And because the event was a donor dinner attended by 2 board members and 1 outside accounting advisor, it gave us witnesses who had reputations they would not want dragged behind a fraud case. Elliot leaned back. "Do you know who sent this?" I did not, but I had a guess. The ally twist came the next morning. Caroline Vale, one of Lydia's non-profit board friends, requested a private call. I knew her only in passing. Elegant. Measured. The kind of woman people assumed was decorative because she was graceful in a room. She was not. She said, "I'm the one who sent the footage." "Why?" "Because Lydia used my event as cover for a crime." I said nothing. Caroline continued, "And because your mother helped me when my husband died, and I don't like debts." She told me she had heard enough that night to become uneasy. When the removal letter became gossip in certain circles less than 24 hours later, she asked the venue manager for archived recordings under the pretext of a donor dispute. She got them before Lydia thought to ask. Then she said the line that settled my nerves more than anything else that week: "I've already signed an affidavit." Part 2 the temporary hearing was set for Monday morning in Mecklenburg County. By then, Evan and Lydia had spent 48 hours trying to build a story sturdy enough to stand upright under oath. It didn't. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically. In feeling. Everything reduced to wood, paper, timing. That helped me. Courtrooms are one of the few places where practice charm begins to starve if it isn't fed by facts. Evan sat at counsel table in a navy suit he wore when he wanted to look serious. Lydia sat one seat behind him, hands folded, face composed. If you passed them on the street, you would have thought they were attending a zoning hearing. Elliot sat beside me with a binder of tabbed exhibits and the kind of stillness that makes reckless people overtalk. Their attorney argued first. He called it an internal governance dispute inflated by emotion. He described my surgery, which I found revealing. He called me temporarily absent from daily operations, as the recovery had turned me into dead paper. Then he made the mistake. He said the company had acted to preserve continuity over proprietary internal systems. Elliot wrote 2 words on his pad and slid it toward me. There it is. When our turn came, he did not grandstand. He walked the judge through the operating agreement notice defect, then the forged signature, then the metadata showing the board consent had been finalized on an office machine after the alleged vote. Then he introduced my LLC license and Section 11.4. He said, "Your Honor, they are not merely fighting with a family member. They attempted to strip the licensor from a regulated compliance architecture, then proceeded as if they could still certify outputs dependent on that architecture. That is not continuity. That is misrepresentation." Their lawyer objected to tone. The judge overruled him. Then Elliot introduced Caroline's affidavit and the donor dinner audio. I watched Lydia for the first visible crack. It came not when the clip played, but a beat earlier when the courtroom clerk said, "Exhibit 12 admitted." That was when she knew it was no longer rumor. Her own voice filled the room. By July, Naomi will either sign or be sidelined. Then Evans. We don't need litigation. We just need paper. The courtroom went silent. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Just that sudden, human stillness when everyone in a room understands 2 things at once: what happened and how stupid it was to say it aloud. Their attorney asked for a sidebar. The judge denied it. Elliot then called Marta. She walked to the stand in a gray jacket and sensible shoes, took the oath, and proceeded to dismantle 6 months of my brother's confidence in under 20 minutes. She explained the internal approval workflow. She identified the export logs. She testified that she had been instructed to suspend my distributions before any valid removal occurred. She confirmed that no proper notice meeting had ever been calendared. When asked why she copied the records, she said, "Because I believed the company was being positioned to commit fraud, and I prefer saving firms before they burn." I almost smiled. Then came the nuclear part. Elliot had held it back until last. The hospital network's general counsel had submitted a declaration Sunday evening after receiving our preservation notice. Mercer Trace had already transmitted a preliminary certification packet Friday at 4:03 p.m. Signed electronically under Lydia's interim authority, representing that operational chain of custody controls remained valid and unchanged. They had done it anyway, even after the demand, even after the TRO filing, even after Lydia called me. That changed the hearing from ugly family business to something much more expensive. The judge issued a temporary restraining order on the spot. My removal was stayed. Lydia's interim governance role was suspended pending further review. No one at Mercer Trace could submit compliance certifications relying on my licensed platform without my written authorization. Corporate records were ordered preserved. A forensic neutral was appointed to image devices and email accounts involved in the contested documents. And because the hospital declaration suggested potential commercial fraud, the judge added language authorizing notice to insurers and counterparties as appropriate. Evan's face went pale in stages, which I did not know was possible until I saw it. Outside the courtroom, reporters were not waiting. This was not that kind of case. But industry people notice things quicker than reporters do. By mid-afternoon, 2 vendors had paused expansions. By evening, 1 lender requested an internal review. By Tuesday morning, our private equity minority partner demanded a special board session. That board meeting became the public set piece. It was held Wednesday in our downtown conference room with floor-to-ceiling glass and the city visible behind everyone like a screensaver. For board members, outside counsel, insurance counsel dialing in, the PE partner's restructuring advisor, me with my walking boot and a folder in front of me, Evan at the far end of the table, Lydia not allowed to vote, but present because she insisted. I had not been in that room for nearly 2 weeks. It smelled the same. Cedar polish and stale coffee. The advisor from the PE firm spoke first. No emotion, just consequence. The fraudulent removal attempt and false certification exposure had triggered a review under the credit agreement. Insurers were reserving rights. The hospital contract was frozen pending verified authority. If not cured immediately, the lenders could move toward covenant remedies. Translation: everyone who had tolerated Evan's swagger now wanted to know exactly how much it was going to cost them. Then insurance counsel asked the question that finally cut through him. Mr. Mercer, when you wrote, "We just need paper," were you referring to lawful board documentation or fabricated board documentation? Evan opened his mouth and closed it. Lydia answered instead. That phrase is being taken out of context. The advisor turned to her and said, "You are not under oath here, Mrs. Mercer, but you are being recorded." For the first time in years, Lydia looked unsure of the room. I did not speak until asked. When the PE partner invited me to propose a cure path, I slid forward a 2-page term sheet. Calm, precise, final. My terms were simple. I would continue licensing the compliance architecture through my LLC under expanded protections. A fraud carve-out would convert immediately to injunctive authority and liquidated damages if anyone again attempted unauthorized reassignment, reverse engineering, or governance manipulation affecting the license. The company would appoint an independent compliance chair for 12 months. All certifications tied to the system would require dual authorization. Evan would step down as CEO effective within 10 business days. Lydia would resign all advisory and governance positions immediately. My suspended distributions would be restored with interest. Legal fees would be advanced by the company subject to later allocation. One board member, an older man named Howard Pike who had spent 20 years pretending not to see family dynamics, frowned and said, "This is severe." I met his eyes. "No," I said. "This is late." Nobody interrupted. The vote took 40 minutes because cowardice likes ceremony. In the end, it passed 4-1. Evan was removed as CEO by the board he thought he controlled. Lydia stood up so abruptly her chair rolled back into the credenza. "This is because of her," she said, pointing at me as though we were in a school cafeteria and not a governed company trying to avoid default. Howard Pike, to his credit, looked tired rather than shocked. Insurance counsel muted himself. The restructuring advisor did not bother hiding his expression. I sat still. Lydia turned toward the board and made the final mistake of people who mistake social influence for legal power. "You all loved me when I was bringing in donors." The PE advisor replied, "This is a logistics company." That was the end of it. What followed was not cinematic. It was better. Forensic imaging confirmed the forged consent had been assembled from a prior signature block taken from an old banking resolution. The originating edits traced to Lydia's executive assistant's workstation, with later review comments from Evan's company email. Outside counsel withdrew from representing them personally within days. The hospital network avoided filing a public claim because our cure package was fast and complete, but they extracted stricter representations and independent quarterly audits. Our lenders stayed patient because the compliance engine remained intact and, now, properly governed. Evan tried to negotiate a quiet advisory departure with a consulting fee attached. The board denied it. Lydia resigned from the nonprofit board where the donor dinner recording had been made. Nobody said why in public. In private, everyone knew. There was no dramatic perp walk. No screaming on courthouse steps. Real consequences rarely look satisfying on camera. They look administrative, expensive, permanent. 6 weeks later, I was back in the office 3 days a week, then 4. The walking route came off. Marta brought me a pastry on my first full Monday back and said, "I prefer the company when criminals don't run it." Caroline and I had lunch not long after. She told me she had spent too many years sitting near powerful people and watching them confuse grace with permission. We became, improbably, friends. Elliot sent one final invoice with a note clipped to the top. "You were right to keep the engine separate. Never apologize for structure." The only time Evan spoke to me directly after the board vote was in the parking garage 2 months later. He looked older, smaller somehow. He said, "You could have handled this inside the family." I adjusted the strap of my laptop bag and said I tried. "You sent a courier." Then I kept walking. 1 year later, the company was leaner, calmer, and more profitable than it had ever been under noise and ego. We had an independent compliance committee, cleaner lender relations, and better contracts. I had converted my LLC into a broader platform business and licensed adapted systems to 3 other distributors in neighboring states. Quietly, carefully, on terms that made lawyers sit straighter. My business account held a great deal more than $14,280.63. Marta was still with me. Caroline had joined one of our advisory committees. Elliot still wore bad ties. As for Lydia and Evan, karma was not dramatic. It was ordinary, which is another word for thorough. Their names no longer opened rooms the way they once had. People in regional business circles smiled politely, then checked documents twice. Invitations got fewer. Calls got returned slower. The kind of social confidence built on borrowed authority does not survive a well-documented fraud attempt. The biggest lesson was not about revenge. It was about boundaries. About what happens when you finally stop treating your own contribution like a family donation. About paper. About structure. About refusing to let someone translate your labor into their entitlement. And about this simple truth, silence is useful, but only until the evidence is ready. If this story stayed with you, ask yourself one thing. Where in your life are you still relying on loyalty where you should be relying on terms? And if you want more stories where order beats arrogance, stay with me.